They didn't ask if they could use my home. They told me. It was a Saturday morning just after 8 when I heard the knock. Not the kind of knock that waits for permission, but the kind that says we're already here and you're going to answer. Before I share what I finally told Jeffrey and Thelma after all those years, hit subscribe so you don't miss how I stood my ground. And while you're here, download your free ebook titled Healthy Boundaries After 60. How to set strong boundaries, saying no with grace, protecting your peace, and strengthening relationship with your children by clicking the link in the pinned comment. I opened the door, and there they were. My son, Jeffrey, standing tall in a press shirt, and his wife, Thelma, holding a binder so thick I thought it might break her arms. She had a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Before I could even greet them, Thelma opened that binder, flipping through pages like she was giving me a presentation. "Marianne," she said, "your backyard is just perfect for a rustic ceremony. It has the trees, the open lawn, and the porch can work as a stage for the band. We've been telling everyone how wonderful it's going to be." I hadn't said a word yet. Not hello, not how are you, nothing. Jeffrey stepped past me into the living room, glancing around like he was taking inventory. Then he walked straight to the back porch, sliding the glass door open without asking, pulling out a tape measure from his pocket. He didn't even look back. "Thelma, I think we can fit the dance floor right here. If we move those chairs out, the band can set up along this wall." My own son, in my own home, talking like I wasn't even standing there. Thelma laid the binder on my dining room table. I leaned over and saw detailed pages, flowers, catering menus, seating charts. Every single plan revolved around my house. The address was typed at the top of each page. She looked up at me with that same tight smile. "We're going to keep it simple but elegant. You'll hardly need to do anything. We'll bring in the crew, the furniture, the decorations. It'll be just lovely." Notice the word she used. Hardly. As if I had already agreed. I felt my hands grip the edge of the table, steadying myself, because the truth was I had not agreed to anything. And yet, here they were, mapping out their big day on land I had tended for 30 years. Jeffrey came back inside, scribbling notes on a pad he must have pulled from his pocket. "Yep, it'll work. Ceremony under the oak tree, photos by the garden, dinner out back. It's perfect, Ma. Perfect for them. But what about me?" I wanted to speak. I wanted to say, "You can't just assume." But the words stuck in my throat. I stood there, watching as my son and his wife carved up my home like it was theirs. Thelma flipped another page. "We'll set up a tent over the lawn. Guests will love it. And don't worry, the company will handle cleanup. By the way, I've already booked the photographer. She's excited about the barn look." Barn look. That barn was my late husband's workshop. He built shelves in there with his own 2 hands. It wasn't a prop for wedding photos. I looked out the back window. Jeffrey was now pacing the yard, pointing here and there like a contractor overseeing a project. My porch, my trees, my garden, it was all being claimed without a single question. In that moment, one thought settled into me. This isn't about a wedding. This is about control. Thelma tapped her binder and said, "We'll need to move your garden tools out of sight. It won't match the photos. Oh, and we're thinking of string lights all around. People love that look." She paused and gave me a glance, not to ask permission, but to make sure I was keeping up. Jeffrey returned, wiping his hands like he had just finished a job. "All right, it's decided. This place is going to look amazing." I finally managed to speak. My voice came out softer than I wanted. "Decided by who?" Thelma didn't even blink. "By us, of course. It's family property. It makes sense. Family property." That was her phrase. My home, paid off with years of my labor, called family property as if I was just a caretaker until they needed it. I felt something shift in me, a mix of anger and sadness. But mostly clarity. They hadn't come to ask. They had come to announce. Thelma shut her binder with a snap. We'll be back with the caterer next week. They'll want to see the space. Don't worry, Marianne. You won't have to lift a finger. And just like that, they walked out. Jeffrey gave me a quick pat on the shoulder, like I was an employee finishing her shift. Then the door shut behind them. I stood alone in my kitchen, staring at the binder still on the table. The pages fanned open, full of plans, my address printed bold across the top. My house, their venue. I pressed my hand flat against the wood grain of that table. The same table where I'd eaten meals with my husband, where I'd hosted church potlucks, where I'd folded laundry late into the night. Now, my son and his wife thought they could just take it. I didn't say a word when they left. But inside, I knew one thing for certain. They had made a mistake. Because if they thought I was going to stand by and let them turn my home into their wedding hall without asking, they were wrong. Very wrong. After they walked out that morning, I sat at the table staring at that binder, but my mind went back further than today. The truth is, this didn't start with wedding plans. It started years ago, right after Jeffrey married Thelma. It has been 6 years of distance. 6 years of feeling like I had lost my son, even though he's still alive and living less than 2 hours away. When he was younger, Jeffrey used to call me about everything. If his car broke down, if he got a raise at work, if he just wanted to share a story about a ball game, my phone would ring. I was his first call. But once he married Thelma, that changed. At first, I told myself it was natural. He was building his own life. A man has to focus on his marriage, on his household. I respected that. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who hovered. So I stepped back. I waited for him to reach out, but the calls slowed to nothing. The only time I'd hear from him was on my birthday or on Christmas, and even then, it was a quick call. The kind where you can hear the engine of his car in the background or voices talking behind him. He'd say, "Happy birthday, Ma," or "Merry Christmas, Ma," and then rush off the phone with, "I'll call you later." That later never came. Thelma rarely spoke to me at all. If she did, it was through short messages, never warm, never personal, just practical things. Once, she sent me a text asking for Jeffrey's childhood photos. She wanted them for a slideshow at a party they were hosting. No greeting, no thank you, just, "Can you drop the pictures in the mail?" I still sent them, because I wanted to believe it mattered. One Thanksgiving stands out in my memory like it happened yesterday. Jeffrey and Thelma agreed to come over, and I was so excited. I spent 2 days preparing. I baked pies, roasted a turkey, and set the table with the dishes I had kept since my wedding. When they arrived, I thought maybe things were turning a corner. But halfway through dinner, Thelma looked around the dining room and said in front of everyone, "This house feels like a museum. It's so outdated." I froze with the fork halfway to my mouth. She said it with a laugh, but not the kind of laugh that softens a comment. It was sharp, the kind that cuts. My niece tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. After they left that night, I stood in the kitchen scraping plates and felt something inside me sink. My home wasn't a museum. It was filled with memories of my husband, of raising Jeffrey, of family holidays. Every nick in the wood, every faded patch of paint had a story. To me, it was living history. To her, it was just old. From that day on, I noticed I was no longer included. They stopped inviting me to dinners or outings. When family photos were shared online, I wasn't in them. When relatives gathered, Thelma always found a reason I wasn't needed. That's when I realized something painful. I wasn't seen as part of their new life. I was being treated like background scenery, like I existed only when it was convenient. And so the years passed. My phone stayed quiet. Holidays came and went with empty chairs. Sometimes I'd bake a pie and eat it alone, remembering the noise that used to fill this house. The hardest part wasn't the silence itself. It was the reminder that silence had replaced closeness, that the boy who used to run into my arms after school now walked past me like a stranger. So when they showed up that morning with their binder, acting like my backyard was theirs to claim, it hit me harder than they realized. This wasn't just about a wedding. This was the sum of 6 years of being ignored, dismissed, and pushed to the side. They hadn't called to reconnect. They hadn't visited to check on me. They came only when they wanted something. I sat in my kitchen after they left, the binder still sitting there like a symbol of everything I had lost. The words from Thanksgiving echoed in my mind. This house feels like a museum. To them, maybe it did. But to me, this home was my safe place. It held my memories, my husband's spirit, my roots. And if they thought they could turn it into a backdrop for their perfect day, without even asking me, then they didn't know me at all. I traced my fingers across the table, remembering the nights Jeffrey had sat there doing homework, the times we had played cards after dinner, the afternoons we had planned his college applications. To me, this house wasn't outdated. It was alive. And in that moment, I made myself a quiet promise. I would not let their disrespect stand. Because when someone ignores you for years and then suddenly appears only to claim what's yours, that isn't family. That's entitlement. And entitlement doesn't get rewarded in my house. 2 days after Jeffrey and Thelma showed up with that binder, I was making coffee when the phone rang. It was a local florist, a cheerful young woman asking to confirm the delivery time for the Hodge wedding at your residence. I nearly dropped the cup. "Excuse me?" I said. She repeated herself, reading from her order sheet. "We have a large order of white roses, baby's breath, and greenery. Delivery is scheduled for the Friday before the ceremony. I just want to make sure someone will be home to sign for them at your address." My heart started pounding. "What ceremony are you talking about?" There was a pause on the other end. Then she said carefully, "The Hodge wedding. Jeffrey and Thelma Hodge. It says here, the venue is your address." She read it out loud, clear as day. I gripped the counter to steady myself. I never agreed to that. I told her, "There is no wedding here." She sounded flustered. "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. This was already paid for with a deposit. If there's a mistake, you might want to speak directly with the couple." I thanked her and hung up. My coffee sat cold on the counter as I stood there, shaking. They had gone ahead without even checking with me. Not only had they told me to my face that they were taking over my backyard, they had also already made arrangements with vendors. And worse, they had used my name, my house, as if it belonged to them. After I calmed myself, I walked to my computer and typed in Hodge Wedding, North Carolina, just to see if anything came up. My stomach dropped when I saw the first link. There it was, a wedding website with their smiling faces plastered across the front. I clicked. It had the date, the guest list, the registry. And then I saw it. Venue, the Hodge family residence. My address was listed for the whole internet to see. It didn't stop there. They had a photo gallery describing how the rustic charm of the Hodge homestead would create the perfect backdrop. They wrote about the oak tree where they planned to exchange vows, the garden where guests would mingle, and even a section about preparations in the bridal suite. I stared at that phrase, bridal suite. Then I realized what they meant. My late husband's workshop. He had built that small room with his own hands, a place where he kept his tools, his projects, and his notes. After he passed, I left it mostly untouched. It still smelled faintly of sawdust and oil, and I kept his old flannel hanging on the wall. It was my quiet place, not a decoration for someone's photo shoot. Now, on their public website, they had labeled it a bridal suite. They had taken something sacred and turned it into part of their theme. I sat there in disbelief. My husband gave me this home, worked in that shop, and left me memories I cherished. And now my son and his wife were offering it up to their guests as though it was theirs to share. I clicked through more of the website, reading details about guests arriving at the front porch and celebrations continuing on the lawn until late evening. They even had a timeline with vendors listed: photographer, catering, DJ, every bit of it centered around my house. I could feel my face heating up as I read. This wasn't just rude. This was betrayal. It wasn't enough that they had ignored me for 6 years, called my house a museum, treated me like I didn't matter. Now, they were putting my private life on display, parading my address online, and planning an entire event without my consent. I shut the computer and sat in silence. For a moment, I felt like I was shrinking, like my own son had erased me from my own home. But as I sat there, something changed. I thought about that florist's voice, cheerful but confused. I thought about strangers pulling into my driveway with boxes of flowers and chairs. And I thought about my husband's workshop being listed as some bridal suite, like his memory was just a backdrop. No, I wasn't going to let that happen. This wasn't just inconsiderate. It was a statement, loud and clear: we don't respect you enough to ask. We only respect what you can give us. And the truth is, they had taken too much already. So as I looked out my kitchen window at the oak tree in the yard, the same tree they had written about on their website, I made a decision. They thought they had everything mapped out. They thought I would stay quiet and let them walk all over me. But they were wrong. I wasn't about to let my husband's memory, my home, and my dignity be trampled for a wedding I hadn't agreed to host. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one. But it wouldn't be the one they had planned. And if you're nodding right now, agreeing that respect has to be earned, then show it, subscribe, and share this. If you don't, then at least tell me in the comments why stories like this shouldn't be heard. After I found that wedding website, I couldn't sleep. I kept waking up, walking to the window, looking out at the yard that had suddenly been claimed by other people. It was my home, yet I felt like a guest in it. The next morning, I checked my bank account. My hands shook as I clicked through the statements. And there it was, a deposit paid to a rental company for tents and tables. The charge was on my joint account, the one Jeffrey still had access to from years ago. I had left it open for emergencies, thinking he'd never take advantage of it. I was wrong. I called the bank right away. I explained the situation, told them the charge was unauthorized, and asked them to put a fraud alert on the account. The woman on the line was patient, walking me through the steps to protect myself. I felt embarrassed even admitting my own son had done this. Still, it needed to be stopped. By the time I hung up, the money was on its way back to me, and the account was secured. But that was only part of the problem. The bigger question was what to do next. For a moment, I thought about driving straight to Jeffrey's house and demanding answers. I pictured myself standing on his porch, asking him how he could look at me as nothing more than a venue. But I knew how that would go. He would say Thelma arranged it, Thelma pushed for it, and he just went along. Thelma, on the other hand, would smile that cold smile and remind me it was family property. No, that wasn't the way. Instead, I thought about someone who had always given me good counsel, my friend Doris. She and I had gone to the same church for 30 years. She had a way of cutting through the noise and seeing the truth. So I picked up the phone. When Doris answered, I didn't even try to hide the strain in my voice. "Doris," I said, "I need some advice." I told her everything. The unannounced visit, the binder, the florist call, the website, the workshop labeled a bridal suite, and the unauthorized charge on my account. By the time I finished, I was out of breath. There was a pause. Then Doris said firmly, "Marianne, they've shown you exactly who they are. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" I admitted I didn't know. I didn't want to fight, but I couldn't let them walk all over me either. That's when Doris said something that changed everything. My veterans group has 3 couples who've been wanting to marry, but couldn't afford the costs. And just last week, I spoke with 2 older couples who wanted to renew their vows, but had nowhere to host it. What if your yard could be used for them instead? Her words stopped me cold. Instead of being forced into hosting a wedding I hadn't agreed to, what if I turned the day into something meaningful? What if my home was used to give joy to people who actually respected it? I sat back in my chair, letting that thought sink in. At first, it felt almost too bold. My son had taken over my yard, my bank account, my peace. But maybe I could flip it around. Instead of being the victim, I could reclaim control. What would that even look like? I asked. Doris's voice brightened. We picked the same day they're planning to use. We invite these couples. The community will pitch in food, chairs, flowers. You'd be surprised how many people would help. It wouldn't be fancy, but it would be real. A day full of love instead of entitlement. I pictured it, my yard not as a stage for Thelma's show, but filled with people who truly valued the moment. A soldier in his uniform marrying his sweetheart. A pair of grandparents holding hands as they said vows again. Children laughing, neighbors smiling. Real joy. The more I thought about it, the more right it felt. That could work. I whispered. That could actually work. Doris said, then let's make it happen. Don't waste time fighting them. Just claim the day for yourself and give it to those who deserve it. By the end of the call, my decision was made. I wasn't going to argue with Jeffrey or Thelma. I wasn't going to beg them to respect me. I was going to quietly take back my home, and I was going to do it in a way that lifted others. I hung up and looked around my kitchen. For the first time in days, I felt calm. Not because the problem had vanished, but because I finally had a plan. This wasn't just about stopping them. It was about showing myself that I still had a voice, that my home still had meaning, and that love could live here without being forced. They thought they had decided for me, but now I was the one deciding, and my choice was clear. The date was theirs on paper, but in reality, it belonged to me, and I was going to give it as a gift to people who would treasure it, not take it for granted. Once I had made my decision, things started moving quickly. Doris called me the very next day. She said 3 young military couples from her veterans group had been waiting for a chance to marry, but couldn't afford the costs. She also mentioned 2 older couples from church who wanted to renew their vows. By the end of the week, we had 6 pairs ready to celebrate. I wrote their names in a notebook. Seeing them listed there made me smile. Real people with real love who would treat my home with the respect it deserved. From that point on, my quiet yard became a little busier every day. People from the community showed up to help. Neighbors brought folding chairs, some mismatched but sturdy. A group of teenagers offered to string lights from the porch to the oak tree. One woman donated mason jars she had been saving for a craft project, saying they'd look better filled with candles. I walked through my house watching all of this unfold, and for the first time in years, I felt alive again. My space wasn't being taken. It was being shared in the right way. Doris showed up almost daily. She was like a general in charge, handing out assignments with a smile. You, tie those ribbons along the railings. You, help me carry these boxes. Marianne, you just sit and supervise for a minute. Of course, I didn't just sit. I was right there, folding napkins, filling pitchers, and sweeping the porch. The small details warmed me the most. One little boy from down the street drew a welcome sign with crayons, taping it to the gate. His older sister practiced scattering flower petals from a basket she found in her grandmother's attic. Another neighbor draped an old quilt across 2 poles to create an altar backdrop. That quilt had been sewn by his mother years ago, and he said it would be an honor if it was part of the ceremony. The closer we got to the date, the more I realized how much this meant to everyone involved. It wasn't just about weddings. It was about community, about reminding ourselves that joy doesn't always need money or fancy halls. Sometimes all it needs is a backyard and a group of willing hands. And yet, beneath all that joy, I felt the tension. Because while we were setting up, Jeffrey and Thelma were still out there, believing everything was theirs. They hadn't called me again, but I knew they were busy. One afternoon, a catering truck pulled into my driveway. I went out to meet the driver before he could unload. "Delivery for the Hodge wedding," he said. I shook my head. "Not here. You've got the wrong place." He double-checked his papers. "Says right here. This address." "Cancel it," I told him. "There is no Hodge wedding here." He looked confused, but he nodded and drove off. When I went back inside, I couldn't help but laugh a little. The irony was almost too much. They were planning their big show, and yet here we were, quietly preparing something far more meaningful right under their noses. Doris said it best one evening while we were hanging lanterns from the porch. "Marianne, let them think whatever they want. When the day comes, they'll see the truth. And the truth always has more power than entitlement." The final week before the day, the couples came to visit the yard. I stood with them by the oak tree while they planned where to stand, where their families would sit, how they'd walk down the grass aisle. The military couples wore simple clothes, their hands tightly linked. The older couples smiled at each other like young newlyweds. One of the women, her hair silver and her voice soft, touched my arm and said, "Thank you for giving us this gift. We never thought we'd get the chance." That moment brought tears to my eyes. I realized then that this wasn't just a plan to stop Jeffrey and Thelma. It was a gift to me too. My home, which had been so empty and quiet for so long, was now filled with laughter, planning, and hope. Still, I knew the real test was coming, because Jeffrey and Thelma believed everything was moving forward for them. They had no idea the day had already been claimed. I thought about what their faces might look like when they arrived and saw what we had created. Part of me dreaded it. No mother enjoys disappointing her child, no matter his age. But another part of me felt strong, stronger than I had in years. This was my house, my choice, my gift. And as the string lights went up, glowing softly across the yard at dusk, I knew one thing for certain. When the day arrived, this place would not be a backdrop for arrogance. It would be a home filled with love. The morning of the wedding came bright and clear. I was up before the sun, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The yard was ready. The chairs were set, the quilt hung neatly across the poles, and the lanterns we strung glowed faintly in the early light. It was peaceful, until the first truck pulled into the driveway. A man in a polo shirt stepped out, carrying a clipboard. "Morning, ma'am. We've got the tables and tents for the Hodge wedding. Where do you want them?" I sipped my coffee and smiled politely. "Out back is fine." He didn't question me. Within minutes, his crew was unloading long tables, folding them open across the lawn. Another truck rolled up, this one with crates of flowers. Buckets of roses and lilies were carried through my front door and set carefully on the porch. By mid-morning, the yard looked like something out of a magazine. White chairs in neat rows, a dance floor laid out across the grass, floral arrangements climbing up wooden posts. The workers moved quickly, talking among themselves about schedules and timing, never once asking if this was what I wanted. They assumed it was because that's what Jeffrey and Thelma had told them. I let them continue. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every nail they hammered, every ribbon they tied was for a wedding, just not the one my son thought. Around 11, I walked down the street to the fellowship hall. The 6 couples were already there, waiting nervously but smiling. Some were in simple suits and dresses, others in uniforms, and the older pairs wore their Sunday best. Doris kept them calm, reminding them that this was their day too. "You'll know when to walk out," I told them. "Don't worry. Just enjoy the moment." They nodded, trusting me completely. That trust meant more to me than I could put into words. Back at my house, the vendors kept setting up. A catering van pulled in and unloaded trays of food, setting up a buffet line under the tent. Someone tested speakers, sending music floating across the yard. The whole scene felt almost surreal. Strangers bustling around, creating what they believed was Jeffrey and Thelma's perfect celebration, while I quietly held the real plan in my pocket. By afternoon, curious neighbors started peeking over the fence. One asked, "Big day for the family?" I smiled. "Yes, it's a big day, but not the way you think." Inside, my stomach fluttered. I wasn't nervous about the couples or the community. They were ready. I was nervous about Jeffrey and Thelma, because I knew at any moment they'd come sweeping in, expecting everything to revolve around them. And when they did, they'd find a truth they weren't prepared for. Still, I held my ground. This wasn't about punishing them with anger. It was about showing them, and myself, that my home wasn't theirs to take. As the workers finished, I walked through the yard slowly, taking it all in. The flowers were beautiful, the tables neatly set, the chairs lined up in rows. I thought about how different this scene felt from the Thanksgiving years ago when Thelma called my house a museum. Looking around now, I saw nothing dead or outdated. I saw life, color, and promise. When the last vendor left, the space was quiet again. For a brief moment, it almost felt like a dream. Then Doris appeared at my side. "They'll be here soon," she said softly. I nodded. "Let them come." Behind us, at the fellowship hall, the couples waited. The plan was simple. Once Jeffrey and Thelma arrived, and the truth was revealed, we'd bring out the couples. The banner hanging above the altar quilt already said it clearly, "United in love." I stood by the porch railing, watching the driveway. The sun had shifted low, casting long shadows across the grass. Guests would be arriving soon, following the directions from that website Jeffrey and Thelma had posted. And that was the heart of the tension. Everyone believed this was one wedding. But it wasn't. It was six. 6 couples, 6 stories, 6 promises made under the oak tree. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. The stage was set, though not for the people who thought they owned it. All that was left now was to wait for my son and his wife to walk into the truth. Late that afternoon, I heard the rumble of a van coming down the street. I looked out the front window and saw a large rented vehicle pull into my driveway. The side door slid open, and out spilled Jeffrey and Thelma's wedding party. Thelma stepped out first, dressed head to toe in white. Her hair was pinned high, her face fully made up, and she walked like a queen, making her entrance. She clutched a bouquet of lilies, the same flowers the florist had called me about. Behind her, 2 bridesmaids followed, adjusting their dresses and carrying garment bags. On the other side, Jeffrey climbed out, straightening his suit jacket, his groomsmen laughing behind him. They looked sure of themselves. Too sure. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. They didn't even glance my way. Thelma was busy directing people where to stand for photos, pointing at the oak tree as if she owned it. Jeffrey walked straight toward the backyard, waving the group along. Then it happened. They reached the yard, saw the rows of chairs, the quilt at the altar, and, most of all, the banner strung across the posts. The words stood out in bold letters. "Today we celebrate 6 couples united in love." Thelma froze mid-step. Her confident smirk slipped. One of the bridesmaids whispered, "What does that mean?" Jeffrey stared at the banner, his face draining of color. He turned to me sharply. "Mom, what is this?" I walked closer, calm as ever. It's not your wedding, Jeffrey. You never asked. This day belongs to people who respect my home. The yard went quiet. Even the bridesmaids stopped shuffling their feet. Thelma's mouth opened, but nothing came out for a moment. Finally, she snapped, "This is supposed to be our wedding. We planned everything. The website, the vendors, the guests, they're all expecting it here." I shook my head. "You planned it without me. You used my address, my workshop, even my account. You never once asked me. That's not how family works." Jeffrey ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, you can't do this. People are on their way. We sent out invitations with this address." "I didn't do this, Jeffrey." I said evenly. "You did. You assumed. And you're facing the result of your choices." Thelma stepped forward, her heels sinking slightly into the grass. She jabbed her finger toward the banner. "Take that down right now. This is embarrassing." I stood firm. "No, it stays. This is their day now." As if on cue, the doors of the fellowship hall opened down the street. One by one, the 6 couples walked out, arm in arm, smiling as neighbors clapped quietly for them. Their families followed, carrying small bouquets, hymnals, and even a guitar. The sight was simple, yet beautiful. Thelma spun around, her voice rising. "You have got to be kidding me. You're letting strangers take our wedding." "They aren't strangers," I replied. "They are people who asked with respect. People who didn't treat me like background furniture. People who didn't call my husband's workshop a bridal suite, like it was just another prop." Jeffrey's face turned red. He muttered, "Ma, you've gone too far. This isn't right." I looked him in the eye. "What isn't right is ignoring your own mother for 6 years, then showing up only when you need something. What isn't right is spending my money without permission. What isn't right is acting like my home belongs to you." For a moment, he looked like a boy again, the same boy who used to sit at this very porch with scraped knees, looking guilty after breaking a window with a baseball. But this was no accident. This was choice after choice, and now he was seeing the outcome. Thelma let out a sharp laugh, though it sounded more bitter than amused. "You'll regret this. Everyone will think you're cruel." "No," I said softly. "Everyone will see the truth. And the truth is this house is mine, and I decide what happens here." Behind them, the couples reached the yard. The veterans stood tall, one in uniform, his bride holding his arm proudly. The older couples walked slowly, holding hands, their families snapping photos. The neighbors began to cheer. It was a moment of pure joy, the kind you can't fake. Thelma's eyes darted around, realizing nobody was paying attention to her anymore. Even her bridesmaids looked unsure, whispering among themselves. Jeffrey clenched his fists, then dropped them, speechless. I turned to him once more. "You told me what was going to happen here, Jeffrey, but you forgot one thing. You may not care about this house, but I do, and I won't let anyone, family or not, take it from me." With that, I walked back toward the porch, leaving them standing there, stunned. The banner fluttered in the breeze behind me, bold and clear. This was no longer their stage. This was a place of love, belonging, and respect, and it wasn't theirs to claim. The moment after I walked back toward the porch, the shift in the air was almost instant. The wedding party Jeffrey and Thelma had dragged with them stood frozen, unsure what to do, while the 6 couples and their families moved forward with purpose. The first couple, a young man in uniform and his fiancée in a simple white dress, stepped under the oak tree. Their families gathered close, some holding phones to take pictures, others wiping their eyes before a word was even spoken. The small guitar we had arranged began to play softly, and just like that, the ceremony began. My yard filled with the sound of vows, simple words, but filled with more sincerity than anything I had heard in years. Behind me, I could hear Jeffrey's voice rising. "Mom, you can't just let this happen. This isn't theirs. This is supposed to be ours. I didn't even turn. My eyes stayed on the couple as they exchanged rings. The applause that followed was warm, real, and contagious. Neighbors clapped, children cheered, and the bride's mother hugged me tightly, whispering, "Thank you." Jeffrey stormed closer, lowering his voice, but still sharp. "You're embarrassing me in front of everyone." I looked at him calmly. "No, Jeffrey, I'm showing you the truth. The bank already reversed the charges you made. The website you put online, reported and taken down. This was never going to be your wedding. That plan is finished." His jaw tightened. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," I answered, "because you left me no choice." Thelma, who had been pacing like a cat, suddenly stepped forward. Her white dress dragged across the grass as she shouted, "Fix this right now. Mary Ann, tell these people to leave. Call the vendors back. We can still make this right." I shook my head. "There's nothing to fix. You never asked. You never respected me. This day belongs to them, not you." She spun around, waving her arms at the small crowd. "All of you need to go. This is our day." But nobody moved. Not a soul. They all kept their eyes on the next couple, an older pair holding hands, smiling like newlyweds though their hair was silver. When they began to say their vows, Thelma's voice was drowned out completely by the sound of applause. Her bridesmaids exchanged nervous glances, some even slipping away quietly toward their cars. The groomsmen didn't say a word. One of them muttered, "Maybe we should just leave," and Jeffrey shot him a glare, but said nothing. As the ceremonies went on, the yard transformed into something almost magical. Children ran barefoot through the grass, chasing bubbles someone had brought. A neighbor's daughter handed out lemonade. The couples laughed, kissed, and embraced under the quilt backdrop. The whole place pulsed with joy that no amount of entitlement could overshadow. I stood near the porch, soaking it in. My heart felt light, my shoulders free for the first time in years. Jeffrey finally threw up his hands. "This is ridiculous. Let's go, Thelma." But Thelma wasn't ready to leave without making a scene. She stomped toward one of the tables, grabbed a tall vase filled with white roses, and shoved it hard enough to tip it over. Water spilled across the cloth, the roses scattering onto the ground. Gasps went up from a few onlookers, but the music never stopped. One of the neighborhood boys calmly picked up the roses, placing them back in the vase. The bride who was walking down the aisle smiled, as though nothing had happened. Thelma's face twisted with frustration. "You're all pathetic," she snapped before storming toward the van. Jeffrey followed, his shoulders slumped. For a moment, he glanced back at me, but he didn't say a word. Then he climbed into the van, slammed the door, and they drove off. The sound of the engine faded, replaced by laughter and clapping as the last couple renewed their vows. I exhaled deeply, letting go of a weight I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. The yard that Jeffrey and Thelma had tried to claim was now filled with the exact opposite of what they had brought. Not arrogance, not entitlement, but gratitude and love. When the final couple kissed under the oak tree, the cheers rose so loud, I thought the branches themselves might sway with pride. The children scattered more petals on the ground, couples posed for pictures, and neighbors hugged me like I had given them the best gift possible. One older man shook my hand firmly. "Ma'am, I've been to plenty of weddings in my life, but none as meaningful as this. You should be proud." I smiled. "I am." As the sun dipped lower in the sky, lanterns flickered on, casting a soft glow across the tables. The quilt backdrop looked golden in the light, and the banner above it swayed gently in the breeze. This was no longer just my backyard. It had become a place of second chances, of promises honored, of real family, the kind you choose. And though Jeffrey and Thelma had left angry, I felt no anger left in me. What filled me instead was peace. they had lost something they never truly valued, and I had gained something I didn't know I needed. The wedding they tried to steal had become the wedding I gave away, and in giving it, I got back more than they could ever understand. If you believe taking back your dignity is worth more than pleasing ungrateful children, then click subscribe and share this. And if you don't, I expect you'll head straight to the comments to tell me why. The morning after the wedding, I woke to a quiet house. The chairs had been folded away, the flowers gathered, the yard swept clean. But when I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, I could still feel the laughter and joy lingering in the air. For the first time in years, my home didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel like a burden or a reminder of what I had lost. It felt alive again, as if love had settled into the walls and the soil, reminding me that this house still had purpose. A few days later, envelopes started arriving in the mail. Thank you cards, one after another. Each couple had written something personal, their handwriting shaky in some, neat in others. One card read, "We never thought we'd be able to afford a wedding. You gave us more than a ceremony. You gave us dignity." Another said, "Renewing our vows in your yard reminded us of why we started this journey together. Thank you for sharing your space and your heart." I sat at my table, reading each word slowly, tears running down my face. Every sentence was a reminder that what I had done mattered. But one note stood out more than any other. It wasn't written in neat cursive or typed. It was drawn in crayons. A little girl, the daughter of one of the young veterans, had drawn a picture of me holding hands with her parents under the oak tree. Above it, in her uneven letters, she had written, "Thank you, Miss Marianne, for our wedding." I taped that drawing to my refrigerator. Every time I walk into the kitchen, it greets me with bright colors and innocent joy. For all the warmth that poured in from those cards, there was also one message that arrived colder than ice. An email from Jeffrey. No greeting, no explanation, just one line. "You've ruined everything." I sat staring at those words. Short, sharp, empty of reflection. I thought for a while before answering, and when I did, I kept it simple. "No, Jeffrey. I gave everything." I never heard back, and maybe that's all right. Maybe the silence between us will stretch longer still. But I can live with that because I finally chose to stop letting his silence define me. My husband's workshop still stands, untouched by their plans. The oak tree holds the memory of 6 couples instead of one entitled Demand. And my home is mine again. When I think back, I realize the story was never about revenge. It was about drawing a line, about saying no after too many years of being treated like I didn't matter. It was about giving something away freely rather than having it taken by force. That's what made the difference. I didn't just say no to Jeffrey and Thelma. I said yes to people who valued kindness, respect, and community. And in doing so, I gave myself back a piece of peace I thought I had lost. Now, I want to ask you something. If it were you, if your child and their spouse ignored you for years and then came back only to take what was yours, what would you have done? Would you have let them go ahead with their plans for the sake of keeping the peace? Or would you have drawn the line, like I did? What matters more to you, avoiding conflict or standing up for yourself? I know my choice, but I'd like to hear yours. Because this story isn't just mine. It's about every parent, every grandparent, every person who has ever been overlooked by the very people they love. It's about deciding whether to stay silent or to speak up. So tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? And while you're here, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more stories like this. Your support keeps these stories alive, and together we can make sure they reach the people who need them most. I'll leave you with this final thought. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give isn't money or things. Sometimes the gift is simply saying no to disrespect and yes to love in whatever form it comes. That's what I chose, and I don't regret it. Lastly, download your free ebook titled Healthy Boundaries After 60. How to Set Strong Boundaries, Saying No with Grace, Protecting Your Peace, and Strengthening Relationship with Your Children by clicking the link in the pinned comment.